we've discovered then, since Darwin showed us that actually this form here that most thinking, let's say in philosophy and so on, says the human and the human mind and so on, is actually a single point on a very rich continuum going all the way back to single cells. And developmental biology shows us that actually this is true even on a single, the scale of a single animal. We all arise from one cell. And so there's this continuum. We're at the center of a very rich, smooth continuum of other forms. And some of which may have to different degrees the kind of human level agency, intelligence, and other properties that we typically think of as the modern human having. But it's actually even more interesting than that, because now with both biotechnology and all kinds of engineering, we now see that there's a whole other axis here where we can now start to make both biological and technological hybrids, chimeras, and various alterations, again, providing a whole new access to this continuum where it becomes really hard to say at what point do you lose or gain certain properties that we used to think it was quite obvious with what humans had and animals didn't. And that's because at every level of organization, we can now mix in new materials, new information, new policies, and so on, and create all kinds of novel beings. So it becomes increasingly important to develop a framework, and this is one of the things that I work on, is to develop a framework that will allow us to simultaneously think about all sorts of unconventional agents. So beyond primates, birds, maybe an octopus or a whale, but also weird colonial organisms, swarms, synthetic new life forms that are engineered, artificial intelligences, either purely software or hardware robotics, and possibly someday even exobiological alien agents. And so the idea is that we need a framework that allows us to think about all of this. And I'm, of course, not the first person to suggest it. So here's Rosenbluth, Wiener, and Bigelow with a kind of cybernetic scale going all the way from passive matter all the way up to sort of human level metacognition up here. So they were trying to show how there really is a continuum of all these capacities. And what's important about this framework is that it has to move experimental work forward towards new capabilities. It can't just be philosophy. So in my framework, there's this notion of a continuum of persuadability, meaning focusing from an engineering perspective on what are the tools and approaches that one takes to modify what a system does. And you can imagine that along this continuum, and this is just 4 waypoints, there are many very simple systems which you can only modify by hardware rewiring. And then there are some cybernetic systems where you can change the set point and it will do something different. And you really don't have to know everything about how it works. You just have to know how to rewrite that set point. And then you've got these other beings that have this marvelous interface that allows us to alter their set points without actually digging in and physically changing them at all, meaning by experiences and stimuli. And this is why humans could train dogs and horses for thousands of years before we knew any neuroscience whatsoever, because they offer up this amazing interface that allows us to do that without this kind of rewiring. And then, of course, you even more complex systems where you can communicate with reasons and arguments. And so the key is that when you're faced with a novel system, you really can't make assumptions about where it's going to be. Many people do. They have philosophical pre-commitments to where, let's say, cells and tissues would fit on here. Modern molecular medicine says, well, they've got to be somewhere up here. We think it's an empirical question that actually needs to be answered by experiment. And so this is what we do. So let's think about where it is that we actually come from. We originate as a single unfertilized oocyte, this little quiescent cell. And that is the sort of thing about which people say, oh, that's just physics. And I kind of really dislike that term, but it really is a piece of chemistry. And eventually, through this incredibly remarkable process of development, we end up being one of these things, or even something like this, a human that's going to make statements about not being a machine and so on. And what's important is that the process is smooth and continuous. There is no place here that developmental biology offers where you can draw a sharp line and say, everything up till now was chemistry and physics, and then from here on you have mind. That actually there is no spot like that. So we have to go from systems that are pretty well described by basic chemistry and physics to ones that are routinely dealt with by psychological and other kinds of techniques. So we have this one complex issue that we're sort of the product of this slow gradual development, but at least we're a unified intelligence, right? I mean, we all feel like a centralized single being, and we think that when people say the ant colonies and beehives are collective intelligences, well, maybe they're a kind of intelligence, but they're not like us. They're a distributed kind of thing. It's not real like us. But in fact, if we were to so for example, Descartes really liked the pineal gland because there's only one of them in the brain, and he felt that was really the seat of human consciousness, because the unified feeling that we have really has to have only one structural representation. But if he had had access to good microscopy, he would have looked inside the pineal gland and he would have seen that, wow, there's not one of anything. It's made of thousands upon thousands of cells. Each one of those cells has all of this stuff inside, right? So there really isn't one of anything. And so the fact is that we are all collective intelligences. We are all built of parts. And the research program that is suggested by this is to understand how those parts scale up to a larger emergent individual. So this is the kind of thing we're made of. We're made of an agential material, not passive matter, not even active matter, but matter with agendas. And so this is a single cell. You can see, well, there's no brain, there's no nervous system, and yet it handles all of its physiological, anatomical, metabolic, and other needs at the scale of this single cell, quite competent. And in fact, the reality that our biology uses this architecture means that we can even have really fascinating cases like this. So this is a caterpillar. It's a soft-bodied kind of creature, so it has a particular controller made for a body with no hard elements. So there's nothing you can push on. Everything is sort of pneumatically operated, so to speak. And it has a brain suitable for driving that kind of body in a two-dimensional world of leaves. But it has to turn into this. It's a hard-bodied creature now that has to live in a three-dimensional world and drink nectar. No, it doesn't care about leaves. And so in order to change from here to there, all of the cells are rearranging. Most of the brain is dissolved. The connections are broken. Most of the cells are in fact killed off. And you build a new brain. But the remarkable thing is that the moth or caterpillar or butterfly still shows recall of memories that are formed in the caterpillar. So you can train the caterpillar and get memories recall out the other end. And so we're starting to see that not only can we have change on the sort of evolutionary scale, but even within the lifetime of an individual, radical changes to the body structure, while some memories remain. And so this gives rise to all kinds of interesting philosophical questions. What's it like? Again, never mind what's it like to be a butterfly. What's it like to be a caterpillar changing into a butterfly? Right? It makes the changes of human puberty seem just absolutely minor compared to this, and the ability to store information in this robust medium that remains after the medium is refactored. This is taken to its complete conclusion, but in these animals, these are planaria. They have a true brain, and you can train them to expect food in this particular location with these little bumpy circles, and then you cut off their head, and the tail sits there for about a week, doesn't do anything. It grows back a new brain. And when the new brain has grown back, you find out that they now spend their time looking for food at the correct location. It's called place conditioning. And the rest of the body seems to store in some way that information and imprint it onto the new brain. And in fact, you can cut them into many pieces and then ask thorny philosophical questions about which one is the original creature, or maybe all of them. And so this amazing feedback between the plasticity of the body and the cognitive content is fundamentally because we are built on a multi-scale competency architecture. Every layer, going all the way back through the body and the various organs and the tissues and the subcellular components and so on, it is not just structural. It's actually it's functional. It solves problems in various spaces. So there's a competency at all levels, and we humans are okay at recognizing intelligence, problem solving in kind of medium-sized objects moving at medium speeds in three-dimensional space. That's our familiar, all our sense organs point outwards that way. But if our sense organs, imagine if we had a direct sense of our blood chemistry, and we had some sort of a sensor inside that was able to give, I don't know, 20 different measurements of our blood physiology. I think we'd have no problem having a direct perception of living in a 23-dimensional world where our liver and our kidneys were intelligent agents that navigate that physiological space on a daily basis. And so we deal with biological competencies in transcriptional space, so that is the space of possible gene expressions, anatomical morphospace, which is what we'll spend most of today talking about, and the space of physiological states. All of these spaces have agents in them which strive and solve problems and succeed or fail, much like the obvious ones do in three-dimensional behavioral space. And so you can even think about evolution as pivoting some of the same tricks, and all of these tricks are around this notion of navigation, this sort of goal-directed navigation, pivot some of the same tricks through different spaces. So early life in metabolic space, and then physiological space, and eventually the genes come along, and so now it's transcriptional space, and then morphology and multicellular organisms, and then brains and muscles develop, and you can do three-dimensional behavior, and eventually even linguistic navigation, right? So navigation, keeping the thread of a story or an argument through linguistic space. Okay, so we start to get an idea that things are not so simple as Adam in the Garden of Eden. It's not just about three-dimensional space. It's not just about a fixed natural kind. Many things are extremely plastic and exhibit competencies in different spaces. And so the bulk of today's talk, I want to talk about one particular example of all of this, although we study many examples, but the one I want to talk about is the agent that lives in anatomical morphospace. And that is a collective intelligence made of your body cells. Now, it's interesting that Alan Turing, of course, needs no introduction. He was very interested in intelligence, broadly conceived, in thinking, in machine substrates. So, in fact, all kinds of substrates for computation and so on. So he was interested specifically in intelligence through plasticity or reprogrammability. But one thing that is sometimes noted is that he actually also wrote this interesting paper about morphogenesis, about a model of order arising in well-mixed chemical media for that could be an kind of an example of how order can arise during embryonic development. And you might wonder why somebody who is interested in computation and intelligence would be thinking about the origins of order in chemical systems. And I think that's because he saw a very profound symmetry between these two fields. The formation of the body and the formation of a mind are, I think, very tightly linked. In fact, the same problem, just in different spaces. And so we're going to talk about problem-solving living machines and how reprogrammable they are. So let's think about what anatomical space really looks like. Here is a cross-section of a human torso. You can see this amazing order, right? All the cell, the tissues, the organs, everything is in the right place, the right size, oriented correctly relative to each other. And it comes from a collection of embryonic blastomeres. This is how we start. Where is this pattern actually encoded, right? Where is this pattern determined? Now, people will reflexively say, well, it's the DNA. Of course, it's in the genome. But we can read genomes now, and we know what's in the genome. What's in the genome are descriptions of the tiniest level hardware that every cell gets to have, the protein sequences. There's nothing directly about any of this in the genome. The genome doesn't have a blueprint of any of this. And so what this then boils down to is the problem of asking about the software. How do large numbers of cells, given particular computational machinery, end up working together to build something very specific? And this pattern is not in the genome any more than the structure of a termite nest or the shape of a particular spider web is in the genome of the termite or the spider. This all emerges from physiology. So we need to understand how cell groups know what to make and when to stop. As workers in regenerative medicine, we need to know if a part is missing, how do we convince the cells to rebuild it? And as engineers, we would like to also ask, and this is the last part of my talk, we'd like to ask, what else is possible? Given the hardware that you have, what else could you build? Could the exact same cells build something completely different? And as we think about the end game of this field, at what point did we consider ourselves done? I think of something we call the anatomical compiler. So the idea is that someday you should be able to sit in front of a computer, draw the plant or animal that you want, or maybe an organ, or maybe some sort of biological robot, whatever shape you want. And the system, if we knew what we were doing, we would have a system that compiled this description down into a set of stimuli that would have to be given to cells to get them to build exactly this. Why do we want it? Well, in addition to sort of very basic questions about evolution and cellular controls, this is the key to most problems in medicine.